Hello Game Makers, today I'm going to be showing you how to build on top of one of GameMaker's template games and start making it into something of your own. The Survivor game template offers a really cool game framework right out of the box. We have a character that faces infinite waves of enemies and gets to scale their power with levels and upgrades over time. All the code is fully documented and the project exists as a framework for anyone to start making their own Survivor style game on top of. So what I'm going to try to do in a couple of videos is show you how to start doing that, adding your own changes and features to the existing code. In this video we're going to escape the bounds of our little map here and make the game world scroll as far as we want in any direction. How on earth do we do that? As we can see, the character currently can't get any further than the edge of our predefined game room, but that's actually behavior that's been coded in. There's no reason an instance can't actually leave the room bounds by default. So if we look in our hero object called obj_hero and go to its main code cycle and the step event, we'll see all the code that looks after the player character. You'll see here in the comments we have a function that keeps the player inside the bounds of the room, so we can start by just commenting this out. We'll come back to what this function actually does a little later, but for now we can just remove it like this. If we run the game now, we can see we are now able to move beyond the edges of the room, but the camera will not follow us. The camera in this template is set up in a simple way using the room settings. With the room rm_game selected in the asset browser, we can use the inspector on the left to go to our viewport settings, and in viewport 0 we'll see that object following is set to our hero object. Let's set that to no object, as we're going to make our own camera system. Okay, with that done, let's make a new object called obj_camera. This object is going to move our viewer around to track our player and let us do that outside of the normal room bounds. Let's add the step event to this object, an event that occurs every game step or frame. Then we're going to write some code. First of all, we check to see if our hero object exists, and if it does, we'll store its position in two variables called x2 and y2. This will tell our camera which coordinates to move towards. Then we'll take the x and y of our camera object and add the difference between our current location and our destination divided by 25. This might seem confusing, but what this does is moves our camera a percentage towards our hero each frame rather than just leaping directly to it. This gives us a smooth camera that steadily tracks our player. Of course, currently we're just moving an invisible object around. We need to actually move our camera. So we'll use camera set view pos to set the position of the camera. By default we're using view 0, so we'll move view camera 0, and we'll set the coordinates to the x and y of this object minus half of the camera's width and height. Otherwise the camera would keep the hero in the top left of the screen, whereas we want it in the middle. Now let's do the step I always forget and actually add our new object into the game. Go to rm_game and select the instances layer, and drag our new object into the game world. If we run the game now, we did it! The camera follows us beyond the scope of our room boundaries. Now chances are we want there to be some limit to how far you can travel. While you could probably go on for quite some time, you might want to avoid the player getting too lost in infinite space. So let's show you how to add an arbitrary limit without relying on simply making a really big room. We'll add a new macro to track our desired world size. A macro is a constant value that can't be changed at runtime. Make a new script called macros. Remove any boilerplate, and simply add macro world size 10,000. We'll have a square world that is 10,000 pixels tall and wide. This is pretty small actually, but it works well for demonstrating the idea. You can make it whatever works for your project. Now we need to add limits to how far the camera can take us, so let's return to our camera object and we're going to add a couple of clamp functions to where we set our camera position. Clamp lets us keep a number between a minimum and maximum. We'll want to keep our coordinates between negative half our world size and positive half our world size, like so, meaning we can go between minus 5,000 and 5,000. Remember that this function sets the top left position of the camera, so we'll also need to subtract the width and height of the camera from our maximum position. The player also needs their limits returning. So we can go back to the hero step event, where we commented out the keep in room function and return it. But we also need to make modifications. We can middle click the function to open it, or simply find it in the script section. As you can see, normally this keeps us in the bounds of the room. So all we need to do is replace the room bounds with our new arbitrary boundaries, which is world size divided by 2 when moving right or down, and negative world size divided by 2 when moving left or up. Let's try it. Okay, it all seems to work, but you may have noticed there are some issues. When our coordinates become negative, our hero disappears entirely, and so do a lot of the enemies and so on. This is because normally the game entities set their render depth to be their negative Y position. This is a common approach to making sure that objects that are further down in the room appear in front of objects further up in the room. But if we start having actually negative Y positions, those depths can increase to the point that they render behind things like the background. This is very easy for us to fix. If we go to the shadows layer in our room editor, we can unlock the depth value and set it to be the same as your world size. When we do this, you'll notice that the other layers beneath it get automatically set to higher render depths, thus rendering them further back in the screen. There's one more problem with our much larger world. It gets very empty looking once we're beyond the room bounds. When we had a small room, it was easy to hand place a bunch of nice background assets. But how are we supposed to decorate a huge and arbitrary space we can't even see in our room editor? Well, we can cheat a little and we can get the assets we've already placed to simply loop with the camera. Let's open our camera object back up and add the create event. We'll assign a new variable to contain every element on the assets1 layer, which currently contains all of our lovely art assets. Then let's return to the step event. Here we'll use a for loop to iterate through every one of those sprite elements that we've placed. We'll store their X position in temporary variable, and then we'll check to see if the X position is less than our camera's X position, so it is left of us, and that the difference in coordinates is more than 1920, or half our predefined room's size. If it is, then we'll move the sprite to the right by the full room width of 3840. We can do the same thing for moving left, where we'll subtract 3840 from its position if the camera moves 1920 pixels left of it, and this will make the asset loop around. We then simply do the exact same thing for the Y coordinate. You can copy and paste the lines and change the X's to Y's, but be careful and make sure you get all of them. Very easy to make a mistake here. You'll also want to change 1920 to 1080, half the room height, and 3840 to 2160, the full room height. Run the game now. And we'll see that our background assets scroll flawlessly in all directions. So that's how you expand the game world of the Survivor template game. Hopefully this inspires you to think about how else you might reshape and build upon this awesome template. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.